On today's episode,
to the certain extent, conservatives and Christians can read about some of these things and see the TikTok videos, and we just kind of want to chuckle at it. It's like, boy, those people. But we need to realize that, there's something very real going on in someone for them to reach the point where they're adopting these things, where they're going so far as to shave their heads and things. And it should be a wake-up call to the rest of us to think, how do we communicate with these people?
Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. People today face many opportunities and struggles when it comes to issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. We're here to bring a fresh biblical perspective to these issues and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastors Bob Fleischmann and Jeff Samelson. And today we're going to be doing our current event, our What's Trending episode for December. We are recording this at the end of November here, so some things might have changed by then, but we feel like we have a few topics that we'd like to cover today too. And it seems like there were quite a few we could have chosen from this time, but we're going to start with RFK Jr.'s, his nomination to the Health and Human Services Department. And so we just want to talk about that a little bit, because while he seems to have some seemingly maybe good ideas with some things, he is and has been known to be a pro-abortion supporter, or pro-choice supporter. And so we wanted to talk about that.
Well, ignoring the controversial thing that he's involved with on immunizations, I thought a particular concern for us was his position on abortion, and he recorded, and I shared it with the two of you, the video that he did on Facebook, where he tries to explain himself. And essentially, it sounds like he's trying to recategorize himself to be in the camp of President Trump in saying that make it a states' rights issue. Let the states, different parts of the country, regulate this the way they want to. And there's a fundamental problem with that runs not just through the abortion issue, but through all sorts of issues that deal with the status of an unborn child, whether we deal with the status from the moment of conception or even during the development stages in the womb. It always sounds arbitrary when you say, well, that state can protect them from conception on, that state can protect them in the last 3 months of a pregnancy. I mean, either it's a life or it's not a life. And I watched RFK's video, and he looks sincere and so forth. But again, it's that complete illogic that drives me crazy.
Yeah, there's a tendency to substitute strategy for actual ideals. They see what they want to see, they hear what they want to hear, and they think, oh, well, he's suggesting something that sounds like what others have suggested in the past that have worked. Okay, he must be on our side, or we can trust him at least. But again, they're forgetting that the ideal should be abortion is a horrible, terrible thing. We don't want any of it. And yes, sometimes we have to make strategic decisions, like this is how we're going to approach it so that we get less on the way to none. But sometimes people just stop and say, oh yeah, the strategy sounds good. And they completely leave out that the whole thing is bad. And we're going to do much better, or I should say unborn children in the United States are going to do much better if whoever's in charge of the Health and Human Services Department is somebody who thinks that abortion is bad across the board, because such a person would then be telling every department, and HHS is, I think it's the second largest department in terms of budget in the entire U.S. government.
It's the second or the first.
Yeah, or it may even be the first, yeah. There's just so many other departments under that. And if you had somebody who was truly entirely pro-life in that position, then he'd be saying to the FDA, those rules that were loosened up about the abortion pills, we're going to unloosen them. We're going to make them as restrictive as we can. Could say to, regarding funding of Planned Parenthood, we're going to restrict that in every way we can. All sorts of things like that. And I just have trouble seeing how pro-lifers in the United States can truly, honestly expect that of RFK Jr. if he isn't put in charge of HHS.
It seems that when people vote, and I mean, of course, people vote differently and stuff too, but there is a group of people that when it comes to voting will always vote pro-life, right? They really want the pro-life candidate, and really to them, and I mean, might be some of us here too, but you're just going to not maybe even consider the other candidate if you know that they at all like oppose life and stuff too. And so in that way, for people that really feel that strongly, then I mean, I just think it's interesting that some of those people seem to be turning away a little bit from this. Like, I mean, just, okay, yes, you always have to vote pro-life. You always have to care about life. And then it seems like when it comes to this, like, well, I mean, he might be doing some other great things. I mean, what is he really going to be in control of with Health and Human Services on the abortion issue? It seems that some people just seem to be maybe giving it a pass in that area.
Well, and it's interesting because we saw it during the election when the whole abortion and IVF issue became a high-profile topic. All of a sudden, otherwise pro-life endorsed candidates all of a sudden were coming out and saying, well, I don't have a problem with IVF and I don't have a problem with abortion in the first trimester, things like that, which of course provided no logical defense for their position. They just, like what Jeff said, that sometimes they've replaced ideology with strategy. If the strategy were clear, like if somebody were to say, I don't think America can handle a truly pro-life position as we should, so we're going to go this approach for now with the idea of educating people, which of course sounds like you're exposing your playbook to the other team. Mm-hmm. But you get people who are doing the strategy thing. I think that's how the Republican Party changed their plank, on abortion, because they just saw it as not winnable, with a strong pro-life position.
Yeah, and I suspect, and of course you'd have to be doing some mind reading to know for sure on this stuff, but I suspect based on reading some of the interviews and the comments made by the senators who would be in charge of giving approval if and when RFK Jr.'s nomination actually makes it to the Senate for approval. There are one or two who are staunchly pro-life, who have not entirely ruled him out, but they have registered strong concern about that. But there are others, I don't know if they've spoken publicly about it or whatever, but some of the more, we'll just say more moderate Republicans, everyone who analyzes this politically has said, yeah, it's going to be hard to get them to vote. And if you don't get all those four, you don't have it in. And the mind reading part is that I suspect that there are quite a few Republican senators who are saying, oh, yeah, well, we want to nominate the people that the president puts forward. And yeah, we should be able to make it work, are actually secretly hoping that someone else tanks the nomination so they don't actually have to vote for him, or else even if they do vote for him, he still doesn't get in. So they can kind of have the best of both worlds there. If you are taking that kind of a strategic approach to things, there's always a chance that it can go horribly wrong.
Going back to his position, potential position as head of Health and Human Services, how many truly pro-life heads of Health and Human Services have we really had? I mean, I know we've often held up C. Ever Coop back in the 80s, the early 80s.
He was just a Surgeon General.
Right, yeah, that's right. He was just, but then they came in, he's the one that proposed anti-infanticide rules for HHS. But then we had, some have debated Francis Collins. Now, Francis Collins, he had some good, strong conservative positions on things, but he liked to play the field a little bit. One of my favorite interviews of him was he and Timothy Keller were both interviewed together during the pandemic, and Collins, commenting on their friendship, said, yeah, we don't agree on everything. That tells you that it isn't like we've always had a pro-life HHS person. Right? It's probably been pretty rare.
And again, that goes to something we talked about on our previous current events episode, that if pro-lifers were thinking that by getting Donald Trump elected, that they were going to have a strong pro-life advocate who was going to install a strong pro-life administration, if that's what they were thinking, they're undoubtedly going to be disappointed, because that's not what he ran as, and there's no reason to expect that he's going to shift gears once he's in there. And to put all your hopes in, well, yeah, we're going to get the perfect guy or gal in this position, there's not a whole lot of reason to be expecting that. And instead, what you should expect is we're going to get somebody who's not so good, or maybe even somebody who's really not good. And we're just going to have to work around it the way we have pro-lifers always have had to in the past.
There might be a bit of solace in knowing that a lot of the recommendation of RFK Jr. has centered around the idea of house cleaning. Like, he's going to slim it down, make it a clean and lean operating machine. So
he's going to make you clean and lean too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's probably how he'll have to do it. So, I don't know. Sometimes those people get so wrapped up in the administrative purification process that they don't have time to focus on a flawed ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is maybe what some people are thinking, how that he is going to maybe just not really bring it up at all. But I mean, I think, like Jeff, you mentioned earlier too, there are ways that it can still permeate in that area as well.
Yeah, I think we are recording this the second half of November. Who knows what's actually going to happen between now and whatever nomination hearings there are before the Senate, whether those are in January or February or whenever. Certainly, there are a lot of people who'd say, I hope his nomination never gets any further. And by the time you listen to this, who knows? Maybe he's no longer the candidate. But what we've been talking about still applies in the sense that if pro-lifers are putting all their eggs in the get the right people elected and get the right people in the right positions basket, that's not a very good strategy for success, because there are much bigger things involved, and we've got to be relying on the Lord more than we're relying on politics.
And the pro-life community needs to keep in mind that we've been losing on the state level on abortion referendums. Even when we win, like in Florida, the majority still was against us. Mm-hmm. And it's a heart problem that permeates the country, and it's not going to be resolved by the perfect pro-life head of Health and Human Services or the perfect pro-life president. If you've got that kind of force working against you, you need a greater force to change that.
Yeah, just kind of illustrative of what pro-lifers are up against in terms of the broader culture. There was a headline for an article in the Washington Post this morning. Anti-abortion groups plan new crackdowns emboldened after election. Distressed by rising use of abortion pills, activists devise aggressive new action now that Republicans will be in charge. Do you think there's a slant to that article, maybe? Yeah. But there are some quotes in there from pro-lifers that are just like, how could you let yourself get publicly quoted saying that? And there's a lot of work to be done at the heart level if we really want to see the success that we want to see.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting watching how this all plays out. We do want to hit a couple other topics. Another one that I had wanted to talk about was this 4B movement. I don't know who wants to take a stab at talking about this. So, Jeff, okay.
Wait a second.
But a very interesting movement that started in, I believe, South Korea. Yeah. Is that correct, Jeff? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the 4 Bs comes from the Korean slogan or whatever, and I know I'm going to be butchering the pronunciation here, but B or BI is the Korean word for no, and it's biseksoi, bichulsan, bionyai, bihon, and it's no sex, no giving birth, no dating, no marriage. So the 4 Bs. And the basic idea is this is, I say it was very much a feminist movement of women who say that as a protest against misogyny, chauvinism, whatever term they're going to use, they are, for the foreseeable future, not going to engage in any of these things. They're not going to date. They're not going to marry. They're not going to have sex with any men. And of course, because of all those things, they're not going to be giving birth either. This is their protest. And after the Trump election, apparently, there are a number of articles that came out of, that this is an attractive thing for more women here in the United States, because they are now seeing what they think is the same sort of misogyny and anti-women stuff coming up, and they can't do much grand scale, but personally, they can make their statement by not participating in any of these things, basically by not cooperating with males in any way.
And I think it's interesting to note, too, the South Korean movement came from after somebody, right, a woman was killed on the subway, or just a very, it was kind of a horrific situation. And I think that maybe started, right, the women not wanting, or I don't know.
It almost was like an expansion of the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
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 And so, but then, I mean, over here, like you were saying too, after Donald Trump won, then it became, we're gonna do that too. And then it was people shaving their heads on TikTok, and just real, I mean, I saw some of these videos just of people that were some were scared, some were just very vocal, and all these things that you should be doing. And yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Yeah, there's some deep psychological things going on here. And I'm not talking just about that woman, she's nuts. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, some of the things that Jonathan Haidt and, Greg Lukianoff wrote about in the coddling of the American mind, and has been written about by others as well. But just this idea that there's this kind of safetyism that's been baked into the culture, that people just think, well, anything that is unpleasant, or that I don't like, or that feels like it might be threatening, is a dire existential threat. And so there we see overreaction, and this is an overreaction. And to the certain extent, conservatives and Christians can read about some of these things and see the TikTok videos, and we just kind of want to chuckle at it. It's like, boy, those people. But we need to realize that, there's something very real going on in someone for them to reach the point where they're adopting these things, where they're going so far as to shave their heads and things. And it should be a wake-up call to the rest of us to think, how do we communicate with these people? Certainly as pro-lifers, we're kind of like, okay, well, no sex outside of marriage, and no getting pregnant from that. Well, okay, that means no abortions. That's good. And if your message is that young men can't have it both ways, where they get to have sex with whoever they want, but they're against abortion, well, that's what we've been saying all along, isn't it? That's kind of Christian morality and such. There's just a lot in this that is not well rooted or well thought through.
Well, there's like a sinister underbelly to this that I've lived kind of with the motto of what sounds crazy now, 10 years from now, becomes mainstream. And I think the first really big example I saw of that was the Jack Kevorkian stuff. When Jack Kevorkian assisted with suicides, and everybody was making jokes and stuff like that about it. Now all of a sudden we've got states and countries legalizing physician-assisted suicide. When the birth control pill and how that's a topic we can talk about on another day. But I mean, they made a country and western song out of it, and it was a big deal, and everyone kind of laughed about it, joked about it. Now it's you can get it over the counter for free. It's just anything that sounds crazy today seems to become reality in 10 years, and it's alarming. And one of the things that we ought to tackle sometime on the podcast is this idea of equality, which seems to be what it always gets down to, is like we've robbed women of their distinctive characteristic as being the vessel that carries the next generation. And of course, that's no greater sense of loss than in South Korea, which has the lowest fertility rate of any country in the world. But then this idea that they have to be equal all the time. And so therefore, because men don't have to carry babies, women don't have to carry babies. And if that means we should have the right to kill that child, we should have that right to kill. There's a whole thought stream. There's a whole chain of logic that never fits. I'm in the middle of reading Carl Trueman's latest book where he's talking about the glorification of self and the veneration of self. And no longer am I thinking about my country or my community or my family. I'm thinking about me. So if I think I'm a woman in a man's body, that's my business. If I want to have a child or if I want to abort a child, that's my business. And you get all that tied into it. And the 4B movement is basically calling it out, and in calling it out, we in the pro-life movement need to sit back for a moment and look and say, I don't think any of us back in the late 70s, early 80s, when we were having some of those early meetings, ever thought that if we had a ruling like we did in Dobbs, that all of a sudden there'd be this snowball effect of states codifying abortion rights in their law. That the joke back in the 80s and 90s was all the pro-abortion people are aborting their children. The pro-life people will just overpopulate them. And of course, they failed to recognize the work on the heart.
Yeah, and when you say, too, like the work of the heart, I mean, that's what I see, like when I look at these women that are on these videos, and they're so scared and they feel like that their rights have been taken away. So they feel like that this is something that they can control. They're trying to hang on to something that they can control in their life, something that they feel like they can do. It's just, it's sad. It really is. And I want to just like go through the screen and tell them like, your rights aren't being taken away. I mean, we're just, we just care about the baby. But it's just there is just that thought that they have no rights now. And they are, I can see it. I can see the fear that people have.
Yeah, and there's something of an irony in that this thing that they are doing to assert their agency, their power to make their own decisions, is really just a reaction to something outside of them, meaning that their actions are really being directed outside anyway. And again, what we would always say is you've always had the power to say no, just as you had the power to say yes. Mm-hmm. All these things that hasn't been taken away from you. It's not going to be taken away from you. And it's just, part of it is that the culture has so ingrained in people today, particularly young women, that, this is what you do.
Mm-hmm. I think too, some of it is also this victim mentality that is coming out too, like that everybody thinks that they're a victim. So, okay, our rights are taken away. We don't have bodily autonomy anymore. I'm just such a victim here. And we don't really know like what it means to have no rights. We are just so, in a sense, spoiled here in the U.S. with having rights. I mean, I get the Voice of the Martyrs magazine and I see these Christian people that really have no rights and that they cannot worship freely. They can't do a lot of things freely. And it just seems when people are just so upset over things like this, it's hard to just not put that in perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
Society, just historically kind of goes through these periods. There'll be, dramatic periods of nationalism. We have to, save the nation. We have to do this. Right now, as a nation, we're going through this horrible period of autonomy, individual rights. I can decide. I make choices. And the thing is that we've allowed a lot of that to enter into the public arena without a strong challenge. In other words, just because somebody says, it's my body, I can do what I want, all this kind of stuff, you're not going to fight against it or anything like that. First of all, why don't you prove your case? Let's see you prove your case first before we do it. It reminded me, a number of years ago, Dr. Ira Byock was on a show, and there was a lady in a wheelchair, and she was arguing for the right for assisted suicide. And it was kind of like, even when Ira had texted me on it, he goes, I felt like I was on Jerry Springer. There were a lot of yelling back and forth and everything. And this lady said, yeah, that doctor should have given me the medication. Da, 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 da. And she goes, so, when I caught pneumonia, he should have given me the medication. And he goes, what did you do? Well, I went back and I got treated for the pneumonia. He goes, well, why did you get treated for the pneumonia? If you wanted to die, why didn't you just not treat the pneumonia? In other words, why do you insist other people have to somehow be party to your, but see, they don't think it through. She sat there, she was dumbfounded because she hadn't thought of it that way. But that's oftentimes when I listen to some of these very militant sounding statements, I'm going, somebody needs to challenge you once in a while on this, because some of them are just loose cannons.
Well, there is one more topic that I do want to hit today, and it is this idea of atheist chaplains. Bob, you sent this out, and the first line you said, need anything more be said? Yeah. And and I don't really know, but it sounds like an oxymoron or something, in a way. Shrimp. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about the atheist chaplains?
Well, it's funny because when I was in college, just out of college, MASH was a big series on television, and he wasn't an atheist chaplain. He was kind of like a homogenous chaplain, Father Mulcahy. He could do the Jewish, he could do the Baptist, he could do the Catholic. So that was kind of what you thought of as the kind of the vanilla chaplain. But all of a sudden now you got an atheist chaplain. And one of the things that always bothers me is on a university level, religion is placed in the philosophy department. And I've always just trembled a little bit, because I don't see my faith as a philosophy. It is a worldview. It's a worldview that I have, how I approach the world, but it's more than just a view. We consider it to be
salvation.
A supernatural origin, all that kind of stuff. But and so now to have an atheist chaplain, it's kind of like how much further down can you go? I mean, you're now at the bottom. Can you go any lower than an atheist chaplain? I don't know. Yeah,
it's kind of an embodiment of the trend in larger society. I mean, people, over the last, I don't remember the exact time frame, but over the last 10 years or so, various surveys and polls have shown that the number of people in America who identify as Christians has dropped significantly. But what has happened is that's been mostly made up by people who have been identifying in this category of nuns. They have no formal religion. And most Christians who thought seriously about this just realized, well, that's just recognizing what's been the case for a while, that there were lots of people in the past who said, well, okay, yeah, I'm an American, so I guess I'm a Christian. Who now are comfortable saying, well, yeah, I don't really have any formal beliefs, so yeah, I won't call myself a Christian. I'm just, something there. And that's basically what these atheist and humanist chaplains are doing. They're just kind of like, well, yeah, we recognize people have these kind of spiritual needs, and we're there to talk to them about it. We don't bring anything to it. I'm not trying to force my beliefs. I'm not assuming you have any beliefs. And it's just, kind of this, whatever you feel is okay with you, just let's be spiritual together. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that in the society.
Yeah, I think with the article that you sent out to Bob, and we'll have these linked in our show notes, but just in a hospital setting, and the patient came up to the chaplain and said, well, I'm not really a Christian. And the guy's like, well, yeah, me neither. And so but this idea that, when people are sick, or when they're dying, or when they feel like they need some type of spiritual guidance or something, then these people are here to just give them guidance and just talk things through, almost just maybe reaffirming what people are feeling and believing, versus sharing the gospel with people at moments where they could really use the gospel in a setting like that.
When my mom went into hospice, she was unconscious most of the time. But I remember at one point when my siblings and I were in the room, the hospice chaplain came by, and she asked if she could do anything for us, and we politely declined. But I was so glad that my mother's pastor was regularly visiting, because it just comparing in my mind what he can offer versus what the generic chaplain can offer. And these atheist chaplains are about as generic as you can get. And I would say that should be a reminder, an encouragement to Christians who are listening to this, that when you are in the hospital, that when you are in maybe at the university or wherever, someplace where there is chaplaincy, don't assume that just because the chaplain is nice and open and friendly and everything, that chaplain is going to give you the gospel, that chaplain is going to give you the comfort of God's word and the promises of God, and have it based on on the Bible. You can't assume that. I'd argue you couldn't assume that for a very long time already, but now especially. So make sure that if you're in those situations, talk to your pastor, get him to visit, or find the local church or whatever, wherever you are, and go there, and don't rely on the chaplain that has been provided for you.
And I have to admit, as snarky as I was when I sent out this article, noting that part of it probably bothered me because, introspectively, there are sometimes where you feel like you do treat your religion like a philosophy. You expect God to do certain things, and you expect him to do it in a certain way. And when things unfold differently, you crumble. And those of us, that have served churches and congregations, we've had members who were just strong members of the church, and all of a sudden something happened that was unexpected that just seemed to dismantle them. And so maybe there's a warning in here that if the secular world feels that they can actually take something like chaplaincy and bestow chaplaincy on an atheist who by definition can't give you any type of supernatural assistance because they don't believe in it, then maybe it's an editorial also on the nature of the people. In 1 Peter 3:15, when we're told, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you the reason for the hope that you have, there's a presumption in that statement that there's something unique about the way you act. And sometimes when I look back at my life and I see different things, there were times where I didn't always act like I had a different kind of hope than the rest of the world. And so maybe those are the times where an atheist chaplain would have stepped in. But the reality is, we were bought at a price of holy blood. And I think Christians need to communicate with a life of sacrificial love and hope in such a way that atheist chaplain knows that if he's going to step into the room while you're there, he's going to listen.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both for this conversation today. And we thank all of our listeners too. And if you have any questions on these topics or ever want us to cover a current event that you are interested in, please reach out to us. You can reach us at lifechallenges.us. We look forward to having you back next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're sure you have questions on today's topic or other life issues. Our goal is to help you through these tough topics, and we want you to know we're here to help. You can submit your questions as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. In addition to the podcasts, we include other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so be sure to check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.